Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry and this is Dewbs & Co, the show where we'll get into some of the things that have got you talking today. And this week sees Chancellor Rishi Sunak revealing his much anticipated spring statement, also known as the mini budget. Now let's face it, we all know by now that the cost of pretty much everything is going through the roof. So what do you want to see in his budget? What can the government do to help make your life a bit easier? And Wednesday this week sees the second anniversary of Britain losing its mind. Locking down for COVID, obviously. And a study by the Mail on Sunday this week suggests that the COVID death toll numbers here in Britain could have been wrongly overestimated. You don't say. Got me wondering though, do you think we'll ever know the true impact of COVID? And how important is that to you? And do you have children? If so, do you think you should be able to smack them when they're naughty? I ask because in Wales, a ban today is coming to force stopping you from doing exactly that. And the British Empire, you'd be forgiven for thinking right now that all of us should be permanently wandering around apologising for all the wrongdoings that occurred back then, but in a bit of basic common sense, the Equalities Minister has come out and suggested, wait for it, that kids should be taught both sides, the good and the bad. Hear, hear to that. And finally, accents. Have you got one? Clearly, I do. And if you've got one, do you get mocked for it? And would you go as far as saying that you've ever been discriminated because of it? I wonder, is accent discrimination still a thing? I've got to say, I actually think it is. We'll have all of that to come, but first, the latest news headlines.
Good evening, I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe says she should have been freed 6 years ago. Speaking for the first time publicly since being released, the British Iranian questioned why it took 5 secretaries of state for her to be released. She also said the meaning of freedom to her will not be complete until Morad Sabaz and other dual nationals are reunited with their families. The British Iranian landed back in Britain last Thursday after the UK finally agreed to settle a £400 million debt dating back to the 1970s.
I'm not going to live for the rest of my life with a grudge over the past 6 years. It has been cruel what happened to me. I think it's a bit early to think that, to hold onto that grudge, but it should have happened 6 years ago. I mean, it took a long, very, very long time for the politicians to sort it out.
President Zelensky says Ukraine could never surrender Kyiv, Mariupol or Kharkiv to Russia. It comes as Ukrainian troops refuse to surrender in the port city of Mariupol, which is surrounded by Russian forces. Russia had given fighters in the city until 5 a.m. this morning to lay down their weapons in exchange for safe passage out. But they refused. Thousands of residents remain trapped with little food, power or water. President Zelensky has urged the West to cut Russia off.
Please do not sponsor the war machine of this country, Russia. No euros for the occupiers. Close all your ports to them. Don't supply them with goods. Refuse Russian energy resources. Push Russia to leave Ukraine. And I know that peace is possible, but you must act to reach peace.
Well, Mayor Vitaly Klitschko has announced a new longer curfew in Kyiv starting tonight and lasting for 35 hours. At least 8 people have been killed after a missile hit a shopping centre in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. A video from Ukraine's State Emergency Service shows a large blast in the northwest suburbs of the city. Shelling has hit residential houses and a shopping district. In the Ukrainian city of Kherson, CCTV footage has captured the moment Russian troops opened fire on protesters to disperse them. Ukraine's armed forces say stun grenades and gunfire were used to disperse hundreds of civilians taking part in the rally. Russia did not immediately comment on the incident. Detectives investigating alleged lockdown-busting parties held in Downing Street and the Cabinet Office have begun interviewing witnesses. The Prime Minister is one of over 100 people who were asked to fill out a questionnaire under caution as part of Operation Hillman. The Met Police says as a result of responses so far, further individuals have been identified and questionnaires sent to them. As yet, no referrals have been made for the issuing of fixed penalty notices. A man on trial for the murder of MP Sir David Amess had researched and planned potential attacks on other politicians, a court has heard today. Ali Harbi Ali has appeared at the Old Bailey and denies murder and preparing terrorist acts. GBNews Home and Security editor Mark White said prosecutors told jurors the case involved a cold and calculated murder.
According to prosecutors, the death of Sir David Amess was nothing less than an assassination for terrorist purposes, cold-blooded murder in pursuit of a warped ideology. The motive, according to the Crown, was revenge for the bombing of Syria. And the suspect, Ali Harbi Ali, didn't just have Sir David Amess in his sights. He was intent on murdering other politicians, including Cabinet Minister Michael Gove.
Protests are taking place in London against the sacking of 800 P&O ferries workers. Labour is forcing an emergency vote in Parliament today, which they hope will outlaw fire and rehire practices after the operator replaced staff with cheaper agency workers. The government has urged P&O ferries to pause the changes and says it's examining the contract it told with them. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps says there is no excuse for the way the company has acted.
It was deeply concerning to see the footage of staff being forcibly removed from ferries, underlining a very cynical approach and confrontational nature of the entire operation. And it's astounding, Madam Deputy Speaker, that a company with a long and proud maritime past, and a company whose vessels bear names like the Pride of Kent and the Spirit of Britain, will in future have almost no British crew on board.
Chinese state media say more rescuers and experts have arrived at the crash site of the China Eastern Airlines flight in the southern province of Guangxi. 132 people were on board the Boeing 737, which was en route from the southwestern city of Kunming. It's reported that no foreigners were on the flight. Local media say there's no sign of life among the scattered debris of the plane, which crashed into mountains. The cause of the crash is under investigation. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now, though, let's get straight back to Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that. Well, keeping me company on my panel tonight, we've got David Curtin, who's the leader of the Heritage Party, James Woodhausen, who's the visiting professor at London South Bank University, and Mariana Hotter, who's the anthropologist. And you know the drill on Dewbs & Co by now. It's not just about us and our thoughts, it's about you at home as well and yours. What's on your mind tonight? What do you think about the stories that we're going to be discussing? You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GBNews. Don't forget, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. We're on your radio, DAB+. This show as well is even a podcast afterwards. If you miss us, you can listen there. We're pretty much everywhere, what can I say? And you guys have certainly, you're quick off the blocks today with your emails. I can tell you lots of coming in. Patrick says about smacking. He says this is just a far left tool to undermine the nuclear family. That's Pat. Howard says if it's illegal and abusive to assault an adult, Michelle, how could it ever be okay to hit a child? Patrick says, never mind talking about the true impact of COVID, Michelle. How about talking about the true impact of vaccines? Patrick, I hear you. Mark says, Michelle, you are unbelievable. You're finally going to talk about COVID death figures being wrong. I've been telling GB News for over a year that this was the case and you ignored me. Shame on you, says Mark. Well, I've got to say, Mark, I'm in your camp. I've constantly been going on about all the hysteria when it comes to COVID. You've obviously not been watching me enough. And John, when it's, I was asking you about accents, John says, Michelle, when it comes to accents, and he writes this in capitals just to make sure I really get his message, he says, Michelle, yours is absolutely shocking. How you've got, he goes on to say, how you've got a job on television is beyond me. Well, John, you sound nice. And guess what? Guess what, John? Us Northerners, we get everywhere, even on your TV. What can I say? Anyway, let's get back to our top story then, shall we? Here in the UK, the Chancellor is expected to tell Brits how the government is going to help us cope with the growing costs of living. Wednesday this week, he'll present his spring statement, and there's speculation that he's going to cut fuel duty by 5p a litre. And his so-called mini-budget comes as pressure mounts on the government to act over soaring energy prices. And of course, there's going to be a much wider squeeze on British households than that. You've got inflation pushing up the cost of living. And we hear it all the time, don't we? It's pretty much everything now. You're going to be feeling this, whether it's mobile phone bills, council tax, we talk about national insurance, food prices, pretty much everywhere. David, your thoughts. What do you want to see from Rishi Sunak?
Yeah, I think most of all, I want to see a return to financial responsibility. I mean, we're talking about the small things here, cutting 5p off fuel duty. I'd love to see that. That's great. And they could do that because they get more they get the same amount with extra VAT because the prices have gone up. So it actually wouldn't hurt the government's budget at all to do that. I don't want an increase in national insurance rates. I think that's not going to be good for people. They're going to say they raise 14 billion pounds from that over a year, but that's the same as the foreign aid budget. I mean, why put extra taxation onto British people when you can do something else that's perhaps not necessary at a time, you know, when we're in a financial crisis? But over the last 2 years, we've increased the national debt, I think, by about 20%, about over 300 billion last year. It's getting on for 170 billion this year. So that's inflationary. And if we carry on doing that, we carry on spending more than with what we can do within our means, then this is never going to end. So we need something more of a systemic look at over government spending and continuing to ramp up the budget deficit and the national debt, because otherwise inflation is just going to keep on going on and on and on.
So get a better grip of the finances. Mary, was you about to come in?
Well, I think that I don't think that quite captures the situation that we're in, because this is a very strange moment in history. We've got Brexit, but we don't have the trade deals that would fill that gap. We're coming out of a global pandemic. The crisis in, the war in Ukraine is having a massive impact on energy prices. So it's not just about fiscal responsibility. I think the priority at this point is actually helping people get through this. And we need our government to act dynamically and ambitiously and actually go for it. I mean, Ireland are going to slash their fuel rates by about 17 pence a litre. France are going for 12 pence a litre. We're going for a meagre 5. And the honest truth, Michelle, is that cutting rate duty on fuel won't actually help people enough, because there are people who are really struggling. They're worried about their electric bills and their gas bills and getting cut off. Now, imagine that you have disabilities and you have a high electricity requirement. Perhaps you've got an electric wheelchair, you've got an oxygen machine, a dialysis machine, stuff like that. That is non-negotiable, because if that plug literally gets pulled, you die. And people are genuinely working out, well, what happens because I can't pay my bill? Does our government really want people who are in those circumstances making those, genuinely life-defining decisions to then have to go, okay, well, my only option is to go into debt? We're looking at much greater inflation. This is the point where those inflation prices haven't actually hit people in the pocket yet. We're just looking at the kind of tidal wave coming towards us. And people are already worried. What we need from this mini budget is an increase in benefits that is in line with inflation, because otherwise people are net worse off. They have less money in their pockets.
Not just benefits, by the way, it's things like pensions as well. If you're on your pension,
well, that counts as a benefit.
Yeah, you'll be panicking. Yeah. I know a lot of people, pensioners, that contact me saying that you're really worried at this moment.
And it's not, sometimes we end up in these conversations when stuff like this comes up in the news. We end up in conversations where people get very polarised and they're talking about, like the work shy, who aren't really, trying hard enough, and that's why they're poor, or they've spent all their money on kind of stupid stuff, or they got themselves into debt. It's just a misrepresentation of people who just might be working incredibly hard, might be living under very difficult circumstances. They are doing their best, and the sums do not add up.
They don't add up.
Our government needs to do more.
To do more, James, do you agree?
Well, I completely agree. 5p a litre, it's peanuts. Let's face it. I think there are two broad points. Just on energy and cars and fuel and all of that, I think we have to recognise that there has been for a long, long time a war on the car and the war on the motorist. That's why the cut on the road tax or the fuel duty is so derisory, because whether it's ultra low emission zones, low traffic networks, the increased discussion on road pricing, the hostility to fossil fuel cars, the growing hostility because of the origins of electric cars, mobility itself is under threat, and therefore that creates a climate, Michelle, where in fact energy prices can be inflationary beyond the wholesale increases in prices. Everybody feels that they can charge a lot because the car is no longer felt to be the right mode of transport for millions of people. So I think that's one thing. The second thing is, should we be obsessed with spring statements and tax and spend and 5p here and 5p there, when what we all know is that the program for fracking or for small modular reactors is about 10 years too late, and we need whole new sectors of industry to create jobs and innovation that go beyond 5p here, 5p there. We need manufactured housing. We need service robots for older people. We need subsea technologies.
What's a service robot for an older person?
A service robot is to what can help people in care homes or in their homes or in hospitals around hygiene, around all sorts of tasks that need to be the subject of major research and development expenditure. We don't get that discussion in mini budgets. We don't get that perspective. We don't get the long-term view.
Well,
that's what we need.
There you go. Well, you've heard the panel's thoughts. I want your thoughts. What can the government do to help you going forward? We know that things are going to get a whole lot worse. Tell me. You can email gbviews@gbnews, or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GBNews. What is going to help you? I'll be back in just a couple of minutes.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight, are we finally about to get answers on the extent of the COVID vaccine's damaging side effects? The man forcing Parliament to confront the pandemic's most taboo subject, Sir Christopher Chope, will be here to discuss his vaccine damage bill. Plus, founder of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young, and GB News star Neil Oliver bring a reasoned approach to the topics leading the news agenda. And I'll break down the headlines of the day with my superstar panel. Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, senior reporter at the newspaper Benjamin Butterworth, and political commentator Esther Kraku. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Just a quick reminder as to who my panel is tonight. David Curtin, who's the leader of the Heritage Party. James Woodhousen, who's the visiting professor at London South Bank University and has just dropped his pen, I think. I heard a clatter. And Mariana Hotta, who's the anthropologist. I must say, I do think there was a couple of sound issues in that first part there, so apologies for that. Hopefully, she says, fingers crossed, they're sorted now. Now, I mentioned in my intro a second ago that Wednesday this week, it's going to be 2 years since the first lockdown in the UK was announced. Time flies, doesn't it? 2 years ago. Boris Johnson told us all, of course, to stay home, and 3 days later, lockdown measures legally came into force. Now, there's lots of questions around the whole COVID-19 thing, not least how deaths were recorded during the pandemic. And ultimately, were we locked down for the right reasons, the wrong reasons? Should we ever have been locked down at all? Got to say, in hindsight, I say no. Mariana Hotta, your thoughts on all of this?
You might not be surprised to think that I disagree with you, Michelle.
That's all right.
So this kind of the focus at the moment, obviously because of the anniversary, it's kind of looming large. But the bottom line is, at the moment, the official estimates or the official record of COVID deaths in the UK is 164,000 and 20.2 million cases. Now, it's right to point out that in those first early days of the lockdown, early weeks, early months, it was chaotic and lots of agencies were struggling to keep up. All the medics were worried. We didn't know what this virus was. And let's not forget, let's not kind of do some kind of weird time warp thing and think that the COVID-19 that we were dealing with in March, April, May 2020 was Omicron, because it wasn't. Omicron is a milder case, which for most people results in kind of cold-like symptoms. The COVID that people were getting back 2 years ago was a version that would kill you, particularly if you had what's known as comorbidity, something else that otherwise wouldn't have shortened your life potentially, but you get COVID as well, and that's you on a ventilator in intensive care and your family grieving around a graveside. I mean, to put it bluntly.
Yeah, I mean...
So there are questions around how accurate our statistical reporting was, what the protocols were, and we need to sort those out. That is important to do that forensic analysis, because COVID-19 won't be the last pandemic that we face. Ours is a globally connected world, and they are coming. These viruses mutate, they jump from species to species, they spread around the world. We need to be better prepared for the next one, and that's why this is important. It shouldn't actually be. I think it's a bit of a sideshow to say, well, maybe a few figures here and there aren't quite as accurate, because the excess death figures, which are reliable because they're kind of absolute numbers, suggest that, for example, March to May 2020, there were 55,000 excess deaths, so more than what you'd expect from, for example, the same time the year before. 63,000 in winter 2020, which is 6 times higher than winter 2019.
David, I listen there intently to everything Mary Ann says. Now, my problem with all of this COVID situation is I think that we almost sleepwalked into some form of hysteria, and anyone that dared to question the narrative, anyone that dared to even say, hang on, can I just clarify something? Are these people dying with COVID or from COVID? You were immediately called a COVIDiot. You were regarded as stupid. People almost wanted to ostracise you for asking simple, basic questions. The journalists at the press conferences had no ability, seemingly, to ask a simple question about lockdowns. Do we need these? What is the impact of these lockdowns going to be? I feel personally like we lost our minds over COVID. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, well, people are now talking about mass formation psychosis, and this is what happened from the very beginning. You're absolutely right, and people were called worse than that. I was called a granny killer for questioning the narrative or daring to question what came out of Sage. And there was a huge amount of fear-mongering that went along with the whole narrative coming from the government and the people behind them to try to get the lockdown lockdowns in place. But I think, a lot of people who are critical thinkers could see from the very beginning that this was just being blown up out of all proportion. First of all, the first lockdown wasn't based on COVID figures. It was based on Professor Ferguson's dodgy modelling.
It's not dodgy modelling.
He said, hang on, I didn't interrupt you. But, so what happened was he said that there will be 500,000 people would die of this SARS-CoV-2, which is the name of the virus, if they didn't lock the country down. But on the very day that they went through Parliament and voted for the Coronavirus Act, he changed his modelling and he said, well, no, it's not going to be 500,000. It's only going to be about 20,000 now. But that was too late. The act was passed. We had the lockdown. And then, there was an increase in total mortality between March and May 2020. But then there was a decrease below the 5-year average over the rest of the year in 2020. So if you look at 2020 as a whole, the total mortality is just the same in line with the last 20 years. It's in the middle. So there was no real epidemic that is out of the ordinary in 2020.
There's so many things wrong with that.
But just hold those thoughts, because I just want James's view. James?
Well, I grew up to books called How to Lie with Statistics and the Use and Abuse of Statistics. And strictly speaking, we're not talking about the forecasts here, I believe, David. We're talking about, how we measured the deaths, what the causes were, and so on. Now, according to the Daily Mail report from scientists in Oxford and a charity that I'd not heard of before called Collateral Global, in no fewer than 14 different terms were used by medical authorities to describe a person who had died with COVID, including underlying COVID, due to COVID, involving COVID, and died within 28 or 60 days of a positive test. Now, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist or somebody who believes that everything the government says is always a lie, I'm not that somebody, to believe that the statistical handling of this epidemic and the measurement of infections, testing, hospitalizations, deaths, and all of that, right up to the Omicron variant, was always concerned with creating the maximum panic and creating the worst case scenario and playing upon people's free-floating fears on just about anything that could go wrong. The virus was extremely destructive. We know that, we understand that, and to be critical of the statistical record is not to say let it rip. And the next thing we'll hear is that our terrible figures, which are not that terrible, are all the result of Brexit. No, the massaging of the statistics, the rubbish charts that were shown by senior scientific advisors, the focus on outcomes and arithmetic rather than the underlying assumptions, all those were a complete disgrace from the medical point of view, from any point of view that was trying to help the population get through this dreadful disease.
You're talking about, both of you are talking about provoking fear. What do you think you're doing right now? For the viewers who are listening to us and watching us now, what you're promoting...
Well, we're talking about facts.
No, what you're encouraging them to do... Wait, what you're encouraging them to do, free thinkers certainly, but what you're promoting now is saying do not trust the experts, do not trust the medical professional, do not trust a panel of people who...
Do you think the World Health Organization... Do you think the World Health Organization is a neutral organisation, Marianne? Do you think the WHO is scientifically neutral on every judgment that it makes about medicine and about the virus in particular? Do you think that's true? That they're impartial at every moment?
Yeah, I think they're guided by
the United Nations, their parent body.
It doesn't really matter about the WHO.
No,
I think it's probably more a relevant focus for us to look at SAGE, the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies.
Who are consistently wrong in their modelling.
Well, no, that's a misunderstanding of what modelling is. Modelling is a dynamic process of, it's not a prediction which can then be proven wrong. Modelling has all these different moving factors that says, if you change the people's behaviour, either by requesting them to do something, by sharing information with them, then the results will be different. It's the equivalent, the kind of the real world, very simple, straightforward, one person analogy is you're standing on a ship and you're worried about getting seasick. So you take some seasickness tablets. And then you're standing on a ship going, oh, I didn't need to take those tablets because I don't feel seasick at all.
I mean, that's a rather simplistic analogy. I mean,
Well,
what we're talking about is
modelling.
Modelling is not the same as observation. So science is about observation,
No,
observing
it's about
real-life data.
Forecasting.
Yeah, well, the forecasting was wrong, obviously. We all know Professor Ferguson's forecasting was wrong, and it's been wrong through the whole 2 years.
That's not true.
We have observations. So over the 2 years, we've got observations. A lot of the observations are based on PCR testing. And even the inventor of the PCR test says you shouldn't use them to diagnose COVID or any viruses. So a lot of them, in fact, the majority of them, were false positives because they were run on what's called a very high number of thermal cycles, which means you can pick up anything. So a lot of the cases that were, you said there were 2.2 million cases of COVID.
20.2 million.
Okay, 20.2 million cases. Yeah, most of those were without symptoms. They were asymptomatic. So no one had an actual... Some people did have a disease, of course. Some people had symptoms. But there's only a very, very tiny number of people who had symptoms which were severe without any comorbidities who actually died from the virus. The vast majority of people who had the PCR tests were asymptomatic. So they shouldn't have been locked down. They shouldn't have been told to stay at home. They should have been told, carry on until you've got symptoms. Don't worry about it. Don't destroy the economy. Don't destroy your kids' education. Don't destroy your lives. Don't lock down. Don't stop seeing your friends. People should be allowed to carry on with life as normal, and we shouldn't have had this...
stack up the bodies?
No, the bodies weren't stacking up. That's the whole point.
You can't accuse somebody of wanting to stack up the bodies.
That's
not yeah, and you can't accuse me and David of trying to scare the population. It's totally out of proportion, and it's quite a low standard of debate, if I may say so. What we're discussing here is what was the actual cause of death and the size of the epidemic measured by lots of different ways. And there can be no doubt, I've been a forecaster for 30 or 40 years. I don't claim to be an anthropologist, Mary-Anne, but I do claim to be a forecaster. And if you look at the forecasting and actually the way the deaths were defined, both were extremely deficient throughout the pandemic. They were unprofessional and they were verging on the hysterical. David is quite right about
I just think you're absolutely wrong. Forecasting fundamentally has a worst kind of possible outcome, a least worst outcome, and averaging figures in the middle.
What are you talking about?
When you are planning how many lifeboats to have on the ship, you don't go, well,
Is this a new metaphor on top of the one you had before?
I'm trying to help you understand.
You're trying to help us, but actually we don't need your help. We need to understand just how scary the tactics were of our nudge unit and our behavioural scientists throughout the pandemic. That's the thing that we need to concentrate on.
It's funny you should mention that, because I'm just reading here, members of the Scientific Pandemic Influenza Group on Behaviour expressed regret about the tactics of fear that was used. They admitted its work was, I quote, unethical and totalitarian. What do you think? Yeah, that's their view, by the way, not mine.
No, they're not the official. That's
I didn't
not
say
an
they were.
official body.
Hang on,
that's
this
just
is
a bunch
the
of people
Scientific
online.
Pandemic Influenza Group on Behaviour. They've expressed
who
regret.
Are they? That's a group that some
They're part of the government's advisors, actually.
No, they're not. They really aren't.
It's one of the subcommittees that advise SAGE.
Yeah.
You'd be wondering.
It's your favourite SAGE organisation.
Yes.
A part of.
It's a subcommittee that advises the people that you was just telling us that we should all listen to. And this subcommittee expresses regret for what it calls its unethical and totalitarian use of fear to try and control us. Lots of you guys, make of that, by the way, what you will. Differing opinions here, all welcome. Jonathan says lockdowns have consequences. He says, of course, it was right to lock down at the beginning of COVID. The NHS was overwhelmed. It was, Jonathan, but look at the state of the NHS now. So what good, some might say, did all those lockdowns and trying to protect it actually do? Adrian says, I work for the NHS and I know people still getting COVID and staff and children, etc. The media need to stop bringing down the scientists. Gareth says it was abhorrent for healthy people to be locked down as often and for as long as we did. Got to say, I do think it was very peculiar. No one ever kind of seemed to question the rationale that this one ailment seemed to equally affect a healthy 18-year-old and an unhealthy 80-year-old. We're all expected to just accept that.
Doesn't discriminate.
Face value. Yeah, I found it very odd. Anyway, let's move on to a different topic. From today, a smacking ban will come into effect in Wales. It basically means that smacking, hitting, slapping or shaking a child will become a criminal offence after the Welsh Government deems such acts are not necessary when disciplining children. Our Wales reporter, Lily Hewitson, has this report.
In Wales, smacking children will become a crime. The new law removes the legal defence of reasonable punishment, meaning anyone who smacks a child, even a parent or guardian, could be prosecuted for assault. The Welsh Government passed the law change 2 years ago. By banning smacking, ministers say children in Wales are now given the same protections from assaults as adults. But not everyone agrees. According to Welsh Government research, 1 in 4 people say physical punishment is needed to control children's behaviour, teach respect and show boundaries. I spoke with Simon Calvert from the Be Reasonable campaign. They're against the introduction of the smacking ban in Wales.
And what we're talking about here is the mum who taps the toddler on the back of the legs or on the back of the hand for doing something wrong. That's what we're talking about. The previous law was very clear that anything that a parent did which left anything more than transient reddening of the skin was already illegal. So the change that the senators made to the law, by definition, is only criminalising the mildest possible contact between a parent and their own child.
However, many support the ban. 38% of people said they did not agree generally with the physical punishment of children. Nearly 20% said there are other ways of ensuring good behaviour. And 10% said smacking is abuse or could lead to abuse.
The studies show there's really compelling evidence that there's no good things come from smacking or tapping your child, but there's a really broad range of harms, harms to the child's physical health, emotional health. It makes them more likely to have mental health problems as adults. It's associated with children growing up and smacking their own children, or even domestic abuse and domestic violence. This law isn't about criminalising parents or bringing the law in that way. This is about enabling useful discussion and debate and educating us all to parent in a more effective and kinder way. So we need more support for parents who are struggling.
Parents say using force on a child is wrong.
From my point of view, I don't understand why someone would have to smack a child. I guess that's kind of easy from my point of view because I've got a very well-behaved girl. I've never had to go to those sort of extremes, and nor would I even contemplate doing so. But I guess the ban coming in will help. Like if I see something, say in the park like this, if I see someone smacking a child, I wouldn't comment. However, this ban coming in will make it more easy for people to approach people and say, everything all right here?
Not everyone who smacks a child will be automatically prosecuted. Wales's 4 police forces have been encouraged to consider a rehabilitative alternative to prosecution if this is more appropriate. Lily Hewitson, GB News.
There you go. James, I'll start with you actually. Should you be able to smack your own child?
Well, I don't favour it myself, but I do defend the right of parents to punish their children free from the interference of the state. I think it's a very serious precedent to set. We already know that in Scotland, the government was unsuccessful, thankfully, in trying to appoint a guardian separate from the parents for children in Scotland. We also know that the Tavistock Clinic in London would rather not tell parents, or bodies like the Tavistock Clinic would rather not tell parents if their children at a certain age want to change sex or change gender. And therefore we're looking at a broad context here of the whittling away of parental rights. I put it to you that if I have a 4-year-old grandchild, if I see him throwing litter on the street, I'm not going to give him a cuff around the ears. But if I see him doing it again and again and again till he's 13, there's going to come a moment when reasoning may not just be the only thing that you can do. And, you know, the talk that I should be rehabilitated in Wales, if I was living there, if the police judged that my cuff, or tapping, as one of your correspondents had it, was actually within the bounds of the law, and therefore I should go on a course to learn how to deal with my child when they misbehave. No, 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 that's a bridge too far.
Marianne, should we be able to smack kids?
No. No, we shouldn't. It makes sense to kind of bring this law into line. Scotland has banned any kind of physical punishment of children a couple of years ago, so it's only England and Northern Ireland dragging its heels. We're in the 21st century. We know that, you know, hurting, you know, you wouldn't be able to do it to your spouse. You wouldn't be able to do it to a boyfriend or girlfriend. You can't do it at work. Why would we think that smacking a child, a minor, a vulnerable individual in your own home, whether they're your flesh or blood, whether you have legal guardianship over them, it just seems really baffling. And of course, I have 2 children, and there are moments where you kind of think, OK, my patience is being tested, and I'm not, at that point, if I'm feeling angry or upset, that is not the time to raise my hand to my child. What am I teaching them? If they did that at school or nursery, they would rightly get punished. If I did it to another adult, I could get done for assault. Why should I be allowed to do it to a child? Of course I shouldn't.
Well, David, of course you shouldn't. Do you agree?
No, of course not. This ban is ridiculous. I mean, this is another sort of another move to take us in the wrong direction. You know, I mean, parents have had the choice of how they can discipline their children for millennia, and like James said, I totally agree. This is the state interfering with the family again. But not all parents want to smack their children. That's fine. They can make up the choice if they don't want to do that. But some parents do want to.
But where's the line then, David?
Well, I mean, the line is abuse. And so the thing is, with this report and sort of what people were saying in the Welsh Parliament, is they're conflating punishment or discipline, which is mild and for the edification of a child to bring them up in the right way, with abuse. Now, of course, abuse is wrong. Where, you know, you just beat someone for no reason, with no purpose, really, really hard. We all know what abuse is. But, you know, light punishment, light physical discipline will teach a child, you know, what's wrong. And you might need to do that immediately for something, you know, in some situations.
I know the difference between right and wrong, and I was not hit in order to learn that.
Good for you. I was smacked, you know, a little bit, one tap on the hand or something. And I think my mother brought me up well, too. So
the wider thing here is, you know, do we believe that all adult behaviour is determined in the first few years of life and so on, and that, you know, that children are, as you said, Marianne, you know, vulnerable. Obviously, they're vulnerable as children, but are they any more vulnerable than for the fact that they're young and small and all of these things? We're discussing this moment at a moment when the Ukraine, including young teenagers and so on, are learning to take up arms for freedom. And therefore, you know, we need to have a discriminating attitude to violence, and we need to be able to say that when push comes to shove, some disciplinary measures, some group cohesion, some societal norms, like the millennia to which David rightly refers, how we have brought up children in the past, you don't just flout them when the stakes are so high in Ukraine and the way that they're going in Britain as well. You do have to discuss them, and we do have to make sure that the state is not given any more power over our personal lives than the kind of powers that it acquired during the COVID incident.
I'm not sure what it's got to do with Ukraine, but I think, you know, if we're going, well, back in the day, I used to be able to string my kid up until he couldn't breathe. We used to send them down mines. You used to be able to rape your wife. We don't do that stuff anymore, and rightly so. And rightly so, there is a legal, the statutory framework that sets out certain social norms that I think, I don't know if you two are quite, you know, with the rest of the nation.
Wow.
You might say the same about you. I think there's a majority. I mean, as you did say, it was only 38% against, which means, you know, 62% were for, you know, keeping the right to smack children. So I think, you know, maybe we are in the majority.
Well, you tell me. Marianne reckons that James and David don't represent the views of the nation. Are these just 2 old dinosaurs to my left and right?
Or could you be putting the pat in patronising, Marianne?
The pat in patronising. Do you see what he did there?
Or the con in condescension.
Yeah, all right. He's going to keep going on. I'm going to go to a break. When I come back, I'm going to talk to you about accents and, not related, the British Empire. Don't go away.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back. Lots of conversation there about smacking. I've just been telling Marianne some of the techniques that I use when it comes to parenting my child whilst I was in the break. Suffice to say, she didn't agree with me either. Anyway, let me know what you think. Do you think you should be able to smack your child? Where is the line? Should there be one? Is it down to the state to determine how you should discipline your own child? Let's talk about accent, shall we? Apparently, I'll cut straight to the nut of it. Do you think you get discriminated against when it comes to your accent? Apparently, workers from East London are saying that they do. They reckon they're getting discriminated in the workplace, literally because of their accent. And it all stems down to things like when they're greeting people. I can't do a Cockney accent, I was going to try, but I can't do it. It's some of the greetings that they're using. But anyway, the principle is broad. Marianne, do people get discriminated about based on their accents?
Yes, I think they do. I think you probably get, well, I mean, you read out one of the viewers.
I get loads of abuse about what I sound like.
The assumptions that people might make, those kind of preconceptions. Oh, you know, maybe if you've got a kind of a strong regional accent, you're a bit less intelligent, you're a bit less well educated than someone who might sound like Jacob Rees-Mogg or Boris Johnson or whatever. Maybe you're a bit slower if you've got a West Country drawl. Maybe you're very charming if you sound like you're from Edinburgh. And fundamentally, I mean, when you stop and think about it, we know that those kind of blunt cliches are obviously nonsense. And I think we do need to check ourselves. That said, and we shouldn't all sound like, you know, kind of RP, you know, this is the BBC News, like it was, you know, back in the old days. We should celebrate that diversity and difference and people's personality. You shouldn't have to hide it. But we need an education system and we need a kind of a society that enables people, youngsters particularly, to have those opportunities to be able to talk in I think what the educators call different registers. So in the way you'd message a mate might be different to how you'd write a job description or kind of a letter to apply for a kind of a job. You need to be able to speak in different registers as well.
Yeah, you shouldn't text. I think a lot of kids, James, I do think a lot of young people text speak when they're doing like professional things like job applications, and I personally just think that's laziness. But accents, do you think still discrimination exists?
Well, quite frankly, Michelle, I think lots of people experience problems with their voice in all walks of society.
But you've got quite a posh accent, haven't you?
Well, there we go. So, you know, what is discrimination? It can be about the voice, and that's a bit sad. But what I understand by discrimination is what black people or Indians suffered from the southern United States in the 60s and in the Indian Empire, which we're going to get onto, or the British Empire in India, I should say. That's real discrimination. I'm sure our East London Cockney friends, you know, have been mistreated from time to time. But I think I'm nearly with you, Marianne. I think I wouldn't celebrate the art. No, well, you know, let's register it when it's possible. I can't be doing with that rainbow bumper sticker, celebrate diversity. I do believe we use different registers for a letter, an email, a text or whatever, not just youngsters. But I believe that it's better to say better than better. And I put it to you that there are millions of tourists, new immigrants, Ukrainians, hard of hearing, old people, and nearly everybody else who would rather, on a crowded, noisy train or bus, hear you say better than better.
Judith has emailed in saying, please, can someone ask Michelle to use the letter T's? For example, she says Britain instead of Britain. Judith, you're right, I do. David, briefly, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I looked at the original article. It was about a Cockney guy in the fashion industry, and he was saying that in the creative industries, it was a block to sort of advancement. But he was actually a professional who'd done well for himself anyway. So, anyway, I don't think it's a big issue. But I think if you are going for a professional job, you have to speak properly. You know, you don't go around saying, all right, mate. You say, hello, sir, excuse me, sir, if you're talking to the boss, to try to get on. You know, it's just common sense, really.
Well, there you go. Let me know what you think. Someone's just written in, Clive, and said, your accent's good for me, Michelle. I think that's Jana. Now, that's a proper job of an accent, he says. Is that Jana? Is he saying Jana?
I'm a Jana.
I don't even know what that is, Clive. What is a Jana?
Is that...
You tell me.
Someone
I've just Googled it now as I'm talking to you. Apparently it's someone that lives by the sea. Is that right? Is that what Jana is?
The deeper issue here is, do we care about spelling? Do we care about numbers? Do we care not about RP or received pronunciation, but at least putting the T's in better?
Yes, we do care. Although I've got to say I don't pronounce my T's. And by the way, for me, it's the letter when I try and say I think it comes out like an ER.
Is that a Norwegian thing?
So if I say like, oh no, there's like snow on the road, people find that very peculiar, but that's the northern accent. Anyway, let's move on very briefly and talk about British Empire, shall we?
British.
Yeah, there you go. I've just done it again. British. The British. Right, I'm going to try and read this whole next segment in a very posh accent. Should school children learn the benefits of both sides of the British Empire? That's according to the Equalities Minister, Kemi Badenoch, who believes communities benefited from the British Empire. See, it doesn't sound natural when you pronounce your T's. Anyway, listen, I'm just going to cut to the chase. I'll get straight to the point because we're almost out of time. So as quick as you can, should kids learn both sides of the British Empire, James?
It's not quite as simple as both sides. You know, the word looting is from the Hindi, and that's what the Brits did. You know, they looted India. At the same time, they gave it a united army, more unity of India than had preceded British rule. They laid down the railways. They gave it a ruling class that was interested in science. And they gave it actually private property in the shape of privately owned land, which was barbaric, but better than what had gone before. So it's a question of understanding that you know, the overall, it's no good to discuss the overall effect. We have to very carefully delineate what were the positive sides on the balance sheet and what were the negative sides. And the negative sides, you know, if you look at the great massacres for which Britain was responsible, you know, cannot be gainsaid.
David, briefly?
Yeah, we should look at the good and the bad. I mean, what's going on in schools at the moment is they're teaching kids the empire is totally bad, Britain is bad, white people are bad, white privilege is a sin, they're the source of trouble for everybody who's not white. I mean, that's critical race theory, which is very damaging, you know, and it's not balanced. We need to look at the good and the bad. And, you know, some people in India, as you said, James, they appreciate the railways and the education system, which is a good thing.
Marianne, briefly with this.
Fundamentally, I think that suggests that the people of the Indian subcontinent wouldn't have railways or education if it weren't for the British Empire, which is fundamentally nonsense. And I speak as someone who is half Indian. Basically, yes, the empire was overall bad. Colonialism was bad. It's not a bad thing to teach people and to have that discussion in society about actually what kind of unchallenged assumptions do we make about the races? Well, races you need to unpack anyway. That's fundamentally what critical race theory is about. Kind of going, hang on a minute, can you kind of profitably say white people and black people? Actually, what does that really mean? Let's tease out what inequality that represents, what historical inaccuracy that represents. And the more we know about it, the better we can move forward to a better future.
That is a debate, I think, for another day. You guys, lots of your thoughts have been coming in. James says, this generation of kids growing up without smacking will create a new society, he reckons, with no regards to boundaries. He goes on to say, crime's going to go up because they won't know right from wrong. Fascinating, James. Do you think smacking is really the only way to teach right from wrong? Colin says, I'm a Geordie and we're deemed thick as planks because of our broad and that accent. He says, but I can tell you that we are cleverer than most. You go for it, Colin. You ignore anyone that says you are as thick as a plank. Don't wash with me. Anyway, my panel, David, James, Marianne, thank you for your time and thank you at home for your company. Have a good evening and I will see you tomorrow.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Variable amounts of cloud, particularly during this morning and early afternoon, could bring an odd shower or two to some parts of the UK, but for the vast majority it's looking dry and bright because high pressure sitting to the east keeps, well, weather systems from the west from affecting the UK. We've got a southerly airflow, and with that southerly airflow, areas of medium level cloud have drifted north through the night, and that's how things are as we start off the day. A chill in the air, many places fine and dry, but some cloud drifting north through central and northern parts of England, Wales, as well as southern Scotland. And in these places, the odd shower couldn't be ruled out by the afternoon. But for the vast majority, it is, like I say, looking dry with plenty of sunshine, especially towards the south and the far north, and temperatures widely mid to high teens, could even get a 20 Celsius somewhere like Cambridge. Into the evening then, any cloud tends to fizzle out, and so widely clear skies, light winds, temperatures of course falling away. I think in main urban areas 4 to 7 Celsius, but in the countryside we could just dip into the low single figures or something a little lower than that, -1 or -2 degrees. Touch of frost then possible as we start off Wednesday. A few fog patches also possible, eastern Scotland for example, northeast England. They'll quickly disappear so that by 9 or 10 a.m. it's looking widely sunny once again. However, as temperatures rise, well, you wouldn't rule out the odd shower towards the southeast and East Anglia. Temperatures here reaching 17 or 18 Celsius. 14 to 16 degrees for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Wednesday brings widespread sunny skies then, and then into Thursday a bit more cloud in the far north and northwest, but for the vast majority it's staying dry through to the end of the week.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that